Imagine you've saved your whole life. Not perfectly, but consistently. You've got a number in an account that would have seemed impossible to you 20 years ago, and you still don't feel ready to stop working. Not because you love the job, because you don't know if it's enough. Because enough feels like a moving target that you've been chasing for 30 years and somehow never quite reaching. This is the situation millions of people find themselves in. Not broke, not even close to broke, but with no framework for knowing when the number they have is the number they need. And the reason they don't have that framework is that nobody ever gave it to them. School didn't cover it, work didn't cover it. And the financial industry, which benefits from people staying confused, certainly didn't rush to explain it. What they should have been taught is one of the simplest ideas in personal finance. It doesn't require a spreadsheet or a financial advisor. It requires a single calculation done once, and it tells you exactly how much money you need to never run out. That idea is called the 4% rule. And once you understand it, the way you think about money, work, and retirement changes completely. Here's the core of it. If you have money invested in the stock market, in bonds, in a properly diversified mix of assets, that money grows over time. Historically, after accounting for inflation, a balanced investment portfolio has returned around 7% per year on average. That's not guaranteed, and it's not linear, but across decades of data, including crashes, recessions, and every kind of economic chaos, 7% is roughly what long-term investors have received. And here's the key insight. If your investments are growing at 7% and you're only withdrawing 4% per year, the account doesn't go down. It goes up. You're living off a portion of the growth and leaving the rest to compound. The money never runs out because you're never actually spending the money. You're spending part of what the money earns. This was confirmed in the 1990s when researchers ran historical market data through every possible 30-year retirement window, going back to 1926, through the Great Depression, the 1970s stagflation, every major crash on record. They found that someone who withdrew 4% of their original balance per year, adjusted slightly for inflation, still had money left after 30 years in almost every single scenario. In most scenarios, they had considerably more than they started with. $1 million invested on day one with $40,000 taken out every year ends up using historical returns at roughly $3.8 million after 30 years. Not zero. Nearly 4 times the starting amount after 3 decades of withdrawals. The reason that number surprises people is that we've been conditioned to think of savings as a fixed pile that gets smaller every time you take from it. But invested savings don't work that way. They grow. The pile isn't shrinking, it's expanding, and the 4% you're taking each year is simply less than the rate at which it expands. Once that clicks, the whole picture changes. Now, for the practical part, and this is where the rule becomes genuinely useful in a day-to-day sense. The 4% rule means your retirement target is exactly 25 times your annual spending. Take what you spend per year, not your income, your spending, and multiply it by 25. That's your number. That's the point at which your money works for you indefinitely, and you never have to work for money again if you don't want to. If you spend $3,000 a month, your annual spending is $36,000, and your target is $900,000. If you spend $4,000 a month, you need $1.2 million. If you spend $5,000 a month, it's $1.5 million. These aren't small numbers, but they're real numbers, specific, calculable, achievable over time with consistent investing. The person who's been vaguely assuming they need $5 million to retire is usually wrong. The person who's been vaguely assuming $500,000 is probably enough is also usually wrong. The 4% rule gives you the actual number, and the actual number for most people is somewhere between those two extremes and closer to the lower end than most people expect. There's something else this calculation reveals that most people don't notice at first. Every spending decision you make doesn't just cost what it costs today, it also raises your retirement target by 25 times that amount. An extra $500 a month you add to your regular spending doesn't cost you $6,000 this year. It costs you $6,000 this year and $150,000 added to the target you need to hit before you can stop working. That's not a reason to live miserably or never enjoy your money. It's a reason to be honest with yourself about what you actually need versus what you've gradually accumulated out of habit or lifestyle drift. The two things are usually not the same. The flip side of this is just as powerful. Every $500 a month you cut from your spending does two things simultaneously. It lowers your target by $150,000, and it frees up $500 a month to invest, which accelerates your timeline toward the lower target. The double effect compounds fast. People who figure this out in their 30s and make deliberate spending decisions, not extreme ones, just deliberate, can end up a decade or more ahead of people who earn similar incomes but never ran the numbers. The gap between those two people isn't talent or luck. It's a single calculation and the decisions that follow from it. The rule has limits, and it's worth naming them. The research behind it was done primarily on US market data, and global investors have seen lower average returns in some periods. More importantly, the timing of market conditions matters enormously. If you retire and the market immediately drops 30%, you're selling more of your investments at low prices to fund your withdrawals, and those sold shares never recover alongside the ones you kept. This is called sequence of returns risk, and it means the early years of retirement carry more financial danger than the average numbers imply. The practical way to manage this is to treat 4% as a rough maximum rather than a precise target. Many people planning carefully use 3.5%, which gives a meaningful extra buffer. Some reduce withdrawals in down years and take a little more in strong ones. The rule is a framework for thinking about the problem, not a number to follow blindly. What the rule does reliably, despite those limits, is give you something no amount of vague saving ever provides. A target. And a target does something to a person's psychology that saving without one never can. It makes the goal feel real. It makes progress visible. Every dollar you save isn't disappearing into a vague future. It's moving you measurably closer to a specific number, and you can calculate at any moment exactly how far you have to go. That kind of clarity changes how you make decisions. It changes what you're willing to do and what you're not. It changes the feeling of earning money because you can see in real time how each dollar saved reduces the number of years you need to keep working. The people who reach financial independence earliest are rarely the ones who earned the most. They're the ones who knew their number and aimed at it deliberately, for long enough that the compounding did the rest. They understood that spending less doesn't just save money today, it shrinks the target and grows the investment at the same time, a double effect that accelerates the timeline dramatically. And they understood that when the number is hit, work becomes optional in a way that can't be faked or approximated, because optional work done because you chose it is an entirely different experience from necessary work done because you have no choice. That's what the 4% rule is really about. Not a formula, not a percentage. A way of understanding that money, properly invested and properly managed, can work for you permanently, that there is a specific calculable point at which the question of running out of money simply stops being a question. And that point for most people is closer than they've ever been told. Figure out what you spend. Multiply it by 25. Start working toward that number. That's the whole thing. Like and subscribe if this gave you something worth thinking about. We'll see you on the next one.